Okay. So I wanted to point out that when we all started out as little embryos, here's a picture of a 5 to 6 week embryo. So this is a little human embryo in its mother's womb. We started off now the legs here are actually, this is what they look like at 5 to 6 weeks. They have not developed the full legs and feet and all that. This is the little tail that ultimately the rump will catch up with. There would be little arm stumps and a little head up here. They've just sort of fuzzied that out for us because what we want to look at is these internal sexual reproductive structures. All right. So at 5 to 6 weeks, you cannot tell the difference between a male embryo and a female embryo based on their reproductive structures. They're all the same. So you'll notice we have this word called cloaca. Those of you who have chickens or snakes or something, you might know that term because this is the little tube that an egg comes out or, waste. Just trying to think of a nice word. So you might know that term, and it's a kind of a term for this like generic tube that can have more than one function, right? And that's where it sort of is right now, is that it could have more than one function. Then we have these structures here. This, we have a duct, this pink duct. We have this other duct that has these little arms sticking out on it that are sort of grabbing onto, well, doesn't this kind of look like a hot dog with ketchup or mustard on it? A little pickle next to it. So these are all things that are going to become something, but right now you can't quite tell what they're going to become, right? They have to do some more development. So in the presence of a Y chromosome, the typical pattern would be for by 7 to 8 weeks after conception for us to start to be able to tell that those little gonadal ridges that we saw here in the 5 to 6 week embryo have now become what is going to become testes. By 7 to 8 weeks, microscopically, you can tell that's going to be a testy. We see these things that kind of look like a toothbrush almost, right? Those are those mesonephric Wolffian duct things here. They have started to become the actual epididymis. They're starting to become what is going to be the epididymis, what is going to become the vas deferens has started to develop. Got our bladder here, stuff like that. Notice that the testicles are up. So they're in the abdomen right now. Remember back when we were looking at the internal male structure that the vas deferens was sort of hanging over the ureter? Well, as the testicles descend, they actually kind of do a flip over the ureter, and you end up with that vas deferens hanging up over the ureter. You can't see the ureters. They would be coming out over here. Hanging over that, and the testicles outside of the body. And so by birth, we have, on average, most baby boys are born with their testicles outside their bodies. Sometimes they're still in the abdomen and have to move out. But they came down that sort of cloaca area and now have exited the body and are hanging inside the scrotum. The penis has the urethra going through. There are some baby boys who are born with their urethra coming out the side, and it's fixed during surgery to get rid of that. Right, because you can see that it had been that the urethra wasn't encased in that. And so sometimes stuff doesn't go the way that it's supposed to go, right? We see that the prostate has developed and everything's there. Now, in the absence of a Y chromosome, the typical outcome will be to follow the female pattern. And so here we have that gonadal ridge becoming ovaries. We have the mesonephric duct degenerating in favor of the paramesonephric duct, which is going to become the fallopian tube with the fimbria on the end. We get a fusing of the paramesonephric duct, and that's what becomes the uterus. The bladder is sticking out to the side right now rather than being stuck in the middle like it is in the male development. Now you'll notice you got 7 to 8 week embryo on the male, 8 to 9 week design on the female, because it takes a little longer to be sure that these have become female structures than it is to notice that they're changing into male structures. It takes a little bit longer to be able to be sure that that's what's happening. And then at birth, we see that the ovaries are in place where they belong. The fimbria is near them with the fallopian tube, the uterus in place, the vagina in place, and so on. So it all starts out as everybody has the exact same internal structures, but the adding of testosterone causes those structures to go one direction. The absence of testosterone takes them a different direction. Now, the same kind of basic thing happens with external sexual differentiation. Here we are at approximately 5 weeks, looking at the outside of a embryo. The structures that are going to become the genitals are visible there, but they're really imprecise. You can't tell what's going to happen. You've got a urethral groove that might seal up and force the urethra out the end of the genital tubercle, and that's going to be a penis, or it might stay open and it's going to become a, vestibule of the vagina. It's hard to tell right now. With the addition of with the Y chromosome and the addition of testosterone, that urethral fold will start to wrap over itself and fuse together and encase the urethra so that it comes out the end of the glands of the penis. Those labioscrotal swellings, look at that word, labioscrotal. Could be labia, could be scrotum. Can't really tell. So with the addition of testosterone, those labioscrotal swellings develop into scrotum to get ready for the testicles to ultimately descend down. The penis testicle complex has got a fused mark all the way down it. That's why there's a frenulum on the bottom of the penis where there is one. And it goes all the way down to the perineum. You can see this fused seam basically on male genitalia. With the female genitalia, in the presence of two X's or the absence of a Y chromosome, that urethral fold stays open and actually sort of develops more, so that you end up with the labia minora developing along the urogenital sinus, they call it. Sinus means opening, right? So you end up with your labia minora. You've got your labia majora being formed out of the labial scrotal swellings. The glans clitoris is present. It doesn't end up with a urethra coming out of the end of it. And it basically doesn't grow very much for the remainder of pregnancy. And that's how it stays smaller, right? And so that at birth, you end up with the basic structures in place where they should be in the fully formed female. So this is really super important for people to know, that it all starts out being very undifferentiated. In case you were wondering why they don't, sex the baby, tell you whether it's going to be a boy or a girl until like 20 weeks after conception, is because it can be really difficult to tell. And in fact, in some babies, even at birth, the differentiation is not complete. And so babies can be born what we call intersexed, where at birth, their genitalia is ambiguous. And so you can't really tell just by looking at it whether that structure that you're looking at is a small penis or a large clitoris. You can't really tell. Was that something that was supposed to have folded all the way over and become a penis, but it's just inadvertently open? Or is this a large clitoris and it's designed to be open? It can be very difficult on some babies to tell what structures they have and what structures are maybe not fully formed and things like that. Ambiguous genitalia describes exactly the genitals. People who are intersexed are people whose internal structures are ambiguous. Neither of those terms refers to the chromosomal makeup of the person. Chromosomal makeup is a different issue from being intersexed, which means that you have undifferentiated gonads, really common in people who are intersexed. And so it's not testes or ovaries. They are undifferentiated and they did not develop into sex cell producing structures. They may have some of the structures that look like they would be masculine structures and some of the structures that might look like they're feminine. When that happens, they don't actually produce sex cells. So if you've ever heard of the term hermaphrodite, that's a Greek myth. There's no such thing as a person who makes both sperm and eggs. It's generally the case that if you have a person who's intersexed, they don't make sperm or eggs. They have undifferentiated internal organs. So the term intersex refers to people's internal organs. The term ambiguous genitalia refers to their external structures. And there are a lot of variations and varieties of how people's genitals develop. And so they have a wide range of sizes that are considered penises at birth and sizes that are considered clitorises at birth. And then you have this middle range that's sort of difficult to distinguish, clitoris or penis. Sometimes the question can be settled by looking at the chromosomal makeup of the individual, but that can be difficult also because sometimes you have a person who has a chromosomal makeup that indicates that they're, let's say, male, but then they have a hormone pattern that indicates that they're female. So it can be quite tricky. And there's a third issue I wanted to raise, which is that sometimes you can have some parts of your body containing XY chromosomes and other parts of your body containing XX chromosomes. These are very rare conditions, but people who have some XY and some XX cells exist, and usually whichever chromosomal pattern is in the actual gonads is what will determine the appearance of the individual. So if the gonads contain XY cells, they will tend to mature into testes, and then the person will appear male. And even if they have XX cells in other parts of their body, and then vice versa, if they have XX chromosomes in their gonads, those will then differentiate themselves into ovaries and female genitalia, and the person will look female usually, even though they contain XY chromosomes in other parts of their body. So there's a lot of complexity in nature. Nature is very complex, but on average, the typical on average person follows the pattern that I'm describing here. All right, so I'm going to switch to another slide deck real quick before I quit, because I wanted to talk a little bit about, apparently I wanted a security alert, a little bit about another aspect of the menstrual cycle, which is, at ovulation. During ovulation, some people have argued that women enter into a state that's roughly equivalent to what we see in animals and we call estrus. So I got the definition of estrus from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary: a regularly recurrent state of sexual excitability during which the female of most mammals will accept the male and is capable of conceiving. Okay. So we're going to talk about this more when we talk about conceiving children, but just as a foreshadowing, female humans are only able to conceive offspring when they're ovulating. So we've met that part of the estrus definition, right? Is capable of conceiving. We've also met the part where humans are mammals. So, okay, we met that. But what about this part where it says will accept the male, right? So, in heterosexual females, they tend to be willing to accept their male partner in other parts of the menstrual cycle besides just around ovulation. And in bisexual or homosexual or any other variation or degree of attractiveness to females, they're interested in sex even when there's no possibility of conceiving, right? So clearly not all aspects of this definition are describing female humans, that's for sure. And definitely this female primate has a different way of signaling that she's an estrus than the typical human female has for displaying that she might be capable of conception right now. It's kind of shocking, the transformation this poor girl has gone through just to show that she's interested. Okay. So estrus is an interesting question. Do human females go into estrus? Well, I thought I'd show you a series of segments from a show that was on the Discovery Channel that kind of goes through the issue of whether females are more sexually receptive or if they behave differently when they're ovulating than when they're not. So I'm going to stop talking here. Going on in the playlist, you'll just in order hit these pieces that I want you to see, and then we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit more. So I will see you after you watch these videos.